Welcome to Photo Eye Conversations. Tonight, I'm excited to introduce you to artist David Trautrimas. I'm Photo Eye's gallery director, Ann Kelly. Welcome, David. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Anne. It's such a pleasure to connect with you virtually and have a chance to chat about my new work.
And tonight we're in your studio, is that right?
My home-based studio.
Back to Habitat Machines, that was not to say your last photo-based work, but you kind of delved off for a while into other mediums, different explorations, and you've returned to a new photo-based project.
That I have. Over the years since I did the Habitat Machines, a lot of the work has been still architectural related. That body of work was very interested in external manifestations of architecture. And over the most recent years, I've been exploring more internal spaces. The scenes of domesticity in this new body of work feels like I'm taking sort of the atmosphere of those Habitat Machine buildings and stepping inside that structure that has sort of a similar vibe, but it feels like I've come back around after 14 years and stepped inside those buildings with this new body of work. So it feels both very new but also very familiar.
I love that. I was actually thinking about that earlier, the focus on the exterior, and now it's kind of turned inward. Mm-hmm. And so just for anybody who isn't familiar with Habitat Machines and Spy Frost Project, those series, can you briefly explain those?
Absolutely. To create those works, I was photographing or disassembling and photographing household goods, be it vacuum cleaners, waffle irons, kitchen mixers, bicycles, typewriters, anything I can get my hands on, photographing the individual components and recreating or using those photographs of individual components to digitally create architectural form. And then I was interested in sort of the modernist architecture and the concept that in early modernism that homes are literally machines for living, and playing around with that notion of trying to perfect mass-produced large-scale housing and playing around and maybe undermining that notion a little bit and sort of pointing the flaws and isolation that came along with modernist architecture.
One thing you had said about that work that always stuck with me that I love was that in working in that way, you didn't have to worry about the laws of physics.
Yeah, they were very precarious buildings in a lot of senses, and there's definitely a bit of an absurdist, humorous slant to it. Almost the reference of Terry Gilliam sometimes gets applied to that work. It's sort of a dark comedy that goes along with these architectural spaces. A sly nod to like these things aren't practical at all.
So not that I want to go heavy into tech, but maybe you are creating these new images essentially using what can be 4D software.
Yes.
But you're creating works on paper, so are therefore back to 1D. And so I'm kind of curious about your thinking there.
A lot of this new work, there's autobiographical references and shared cultural references of sort of the late modernist era, like 70s, 80s. It's the era I grew up in. And I'm looking at domestic scenes of place of both, it's often associated with our best memories, but it's also where we sit with some of the most challenging aspects of life, be it end of relationships, loss of loved one, things like that. So a lot of this work is looking back into the past. So even though I'm using cutting edge technology, the end result, I didn't want it to be super slick, super modern, and have that contradiction in the work where it's this old nostalgic feeling, but it's like, why is it so slick? So I render out these images and then print them on a warm tone natural cotton rag paper with matte ink. And I find that helps dispel that or create that sense of suspension of disbelief that there's a bit of an uncanny valley. Like if it's an old document, an old photograph, you have that initial view of it. It makes you think that it's maybe something older than a contemporary piece of artwork.
I do love that about the work, and not to say that nostalgia was necessarily what you were going for, but in a lot of these images, we're seeing elements like old payphones or the diner scene, but then there's always some sort of twist that's really kind of subtle that makes you wonder.
Yeah, the objects were specifically chosen for their universality. I think most people would recognize these objects, if not have a personal relationship with them. And I think that's makes for a broad entry point for most of the works. And then I'm taking those tropes, those common things, and as you say, distorting them somehow, mitigating their original use to make them, I don't know if unsettling is quite the right word, but they're a bit like, oh, what's going on here? It makes you reconsider what's happening with these objects in their sort of compromised forms.
This project, as I understand, it started during the pandemic. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Like many art projects, it's lived a couple of different lives. So I initially received support from the city of Hamilton. They have a arts program, and I wrote a grant for this body of work. And initially, it was going to be about public and private space during COVID and how our relationship with those spaces changed. You know, at least here in Canada, everything was shut down. Public spaces became threatening. You couldn't go congregate with a bunch of people anymore. So I was interested in doing a body of work that explored architecture that way. So as I started working on it, I found a much more personal narrative emerge, and that was about how in lockdown we were spending way more time, or much more time in domestic spaces at home. Luckily, my studio was at home, so I could still work in the lockdown. But the work, it was definitely directly initially going to touch upon COVID, and then it switched into more autobiographical things and domestic scenes.
Because so many of the items and scenes that you're depicting, a lot of people do have a relationship with those things. These images manage to be open-ended but personal.
Yeah, and I'm glad that translate in the work, because a lot of these pieces are informed by very personal things. Like, there's one piece with the bicycle that's basically integrated with a fire hydrant, and that references a pretty awful bike accident that I had a number of years ago, hospitalized and long recovery period. You know, that's my own personal trauma that led to that work. But you don't necessarily need to know that as a viewer to bring your own meaning and own entry point into it. And I tried to make all these works have that duality where they're often informed by my own personal stories. Many of them quite intense, but you don't need to know it. You need to know those as a viewer to appreciate them.
So regarding the software you're using, I think you had mentioned the other day that lockdown also gave you a little extra time to sit down with that program. And in looking at it, that program, I don't think anybody could ever fully master everything it does, because that would be crazy. But it gave you a little more time to get to know the tool.
I've actually had a long trajectory with this software tool. It's the Cinema 4D, and the first time I was exposed to it is when I was a college student back in the mid-90s. And I was completely blown away. I was like, oh, wow, like 3D, this is cool. Like, I can model stuff. I played around with it, and I had no idea what to do with it. Put it aside, came back to it after that every couple of years. I was like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure out what I want to do with this powerful, powerful tool. And nothing ever clicked. I would use it on occasion for visualizations for a public art proposal or to do some freelance work for someone else, but it never clicked for my own practice for an end product until COVID. And I was determined finally after, oh wow, that would have been 24 years of knowing about this software, to finally figure out a way to use it for my own practice. And just started drawing, watching dozens of tutorials, and basically retaught the program to myself, and with this body of work found an entry point into it. As you know, this software application is so powerful, it's almost impossible to master. And within that, I think it just gives you too many possibilities. For me, unless I had a very focused, specific thing that I wanted to get done with it, I would get so distracted. There'd be one tiny little detail that would be a couple of pixels wide in the final result, but I would spend like half a day on that, just not knowing where to put my energy and my focus. So yeah, COVID gave me the space to kind of make those mistakes and waste hundreds of hours kind of figuring that out. And on the other side of it, I'm quite happy with the result.
So one thing I was thinking about today when I was looking at your images again is the use of shadows And the images, the light and shadows are really quite interesting.
It was, I think, two bodies of work ago where I started using actually cinema to put an object and create these long shadows. And then I would take that image and redraw it in Illustrator. And I was using a laser cutter to etch into paper. So the cinema program wasn't the end result, but that's when I started getting interested in the use of lighting as a narrative component of my work. And specifically for this body of work, the shadows relate to my initial idea of making these about COVID and COVID related spaces and a relationship with architecture. And I was referencing the surrealist use of light in their paintings in reference to the traumas of World War I and the chaos of Europe afterwards, and using lighting to establish this transitional moments of the day. Is it like dawn? Is it dusk? These long shadows imply some kind of dream state. It's a way to sort of confound your sense of reality. And I really like that narrative thread, that historical narrative thread, and really wanted to bring that into these works as an element to further the sense that these works are somehow strange or a little bit unsettling or a little bit eerie through the use of that light.
And this is ongoing, right?
I think I've completed maybe 12 or 14 pieces so far. This is the most excited I've been about a new direction of my practice since I was doing that photo-based work over the past number of years. I would do a body of work, finish it, complete it, and then move on to the next thing and just not revisit it. But it feels like this could be a through line in my career for many, many years. And I think it's both the software. I'm constantly learning, and it feels like I'm very happy with this work I've made so far, but I'm really excited to see 2 years from now when I'm able to do the software and how I'm able to better sort of convey the narratives and images I have in my head that right now I just don't have the ability to realize. So it feels like the start of a many, many year exciting big practice shift.
Well, we're excited about what we've seen so far. And I really love the idea that these could be potentially interiors from past work. I'm really into that idea.
As they say, time is a circle, life is a circle, things come back around eventually, just in different forms. So yeah, it feels like coming home. It feels the most sort of comfortable and familiar, at least production wise.
And you have a few prints there. Can we see some of those prints?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is one of the kitchen scenes here with the stove rack extending out and licking the knife. This one's sort of about like fever dreams and wake up in the middle of the night when you have the flu or something and go into the kitchen and the world is a strange, unsettling place and it feels like everything, all the burners are on 10 and you're just cooking in yourself. I spend so much time looking at them on screen, which is, as you know, a transmitted light. And when you print them, they completely change feeling. So I've been doing tons of printing on the production end of these just to get the colors and values and everything in the way that I want them. But yeah, it's another one with a record player and an extended arm.
In addition to the light and shadows, there's some really fascinating textures you're working with as well.
That was part of the relearning of this software. So a lot of these are constructed with 3D models that I either create myself or I purchase them through, it's the same thing as Shutterstock. It's an image foundry type thing, but for 3D models. And then I modify them however I need to complete the composition. But a lot of them said PBR ready. I'm like, what is PBR? What does that mean? Like, I have no idea. It's like, okay, here we go, YouTube. And basically that's a way of creating photorealistic textures in a 3D environment. And once I clued into that, it's like, oh, that's how you do it. Like, that's one of the ways that you can get these really interesting textures is by using this PBR process. So for these works, I spent a couple of weeks going down that tutorial rabbit hole and downloading models that had these already set up so I could see how it was done and kind of copy that and build on that. But to build a lot of these textures, they're actually based off of real world photographs. So there's other creators out there who will photograph these materials, be it wood or fabric or tile, and then run them through another application that sort of builds this back structure that the 3D program can then use to tell the light how to bounce off of it, how to create little fibers or little defects and reflections. It's an incredibly powerful thing, and it allows you to have, basically take the real world textures and wrap it around these objects.
So for anybody who would question this as photography,
it feels very much like post photography to me. So I use all of the same tools that I used when I was doing traditional photography. I have a camera in the 3D environment. I have a virtual camera. I can set the focal length of the lens. I can set depth of field. If you're doing animation, you can set shutter speed. I create lighting. You can make it diffuse. You can have like key lighting, like direct hard shadow lighting. But same thing, you have to position the light, you have to orient it, you have to control the wattage, the color temperature. So basically, it feels like I've taken my physical studio and just shrunk it down, and now I can control it with a mouse as opposed to directly with my hands. But I still have to go through all the same processes as if I was doing a traditional photograph. Be it digital in this case, but it's the same world.
An extension anyways. And,
mm-hmm.
It's 2022 and it's, hey, you're in Canada, I'm in Santa Fe, and we're having a conversation in your studio. So
exactly.
Technology, it's there's so many different possibilities out there. But as much as we have talked mm-hmm. about tools and software, without your ideas, without someone's imagination, none of this can happen. I would just like to say that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's just a tool. It's like a hammer and saw doesn't build a house. You just go with a carpenter, to make that happen. And same with these works. Training myself with composition, with color, with light, with shadows. It's all the things that I've learned from, being invested in photographic processes for 25 years now. So it's all a continuum, and it all relates, just a slightly different tool and a means to an end.
Exactly. Well, thanks so much for having us in your studio tonight, David. Really, really appreciate it. Good to catch up with you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
And I'll look forward to seeing where this goes.
Absolutely. And hopefully before too long, and not another 12, 14 years, I'll make it down to Santa Fe and we can reconnect in person. It should be absolutely wonderful.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you back.
I would love it.
Thank you for watching Photo Eye Conversations. I hope you enjoyed meeting David Trautrimas and learning about his new work. You can view his work on our website at photoeye.com, as well as the Photo Eye blog. If you'd like more information about prints, please email me at gallery@photoeye.com. Thanks for watching and have a great night.